Welcome to the Salt Strong Podcast, disrupting fishing entertainment as you know it. Prepare to laugh. Prepare to get to know fishing legends in a whole new and unfiltered way. And on occasion, you might even learn a thing or two about fishing. Here's your host, Joe Simons. Like diamonds.
Hello, Salt Strong Nation. Joe Simons. Like diamonds, we be back. Pastor Johnny Kelly, good to see you, brother.
Good to see you too, man. I'm glad to be here today.
We are going to be talking about another hard-hitting one today.
Yeah, like depression, anxiety, just mental health.
And you've been discussing this quite a bit at your church, I know, the last couple of weeks, and it's attracted a lot of people because I think so many of us who have been through bouts or disorders with anxiety and depression. And I had a lot of anxiety in my life and a little bit of depression, but I mean, severe anxiety. And I was afraid to go to the church. I was even a little embarrassed to tell some of my Christian friends, including own family members, because I thought they would judge me. And I think no one likes to admit weakness. And in many people's eyes, you know, being depressed and being full of anxiety and having a full-on anxiety or panic attack could be looked at as a sign of weakness. I know, because that's how I thought it was. And so let's talk about that. You know, can you still be Christian and have anxiety attacks? Yeah,
you know, I when it comes to, I mean, depression, anxiety, I mean, they're obviously two different disorders, but they are so closely tied. There's a quote from an author that I think describes the idea of anxiety in such a brilliant way. It's a guy named Max Lucado, or Lucado. You know, you say Lucado, I say Lucado. He has a book called Anxious for Nothing, and his description of anxiety is so awesome. It is so right on the money. Here's his description. It says, it's a low-grade fear, an edginess, a dread, a cold wind that won't stop howling. It's not so much a storm as the certainty that one is coming, always coming. Sunny days are just an interlude. You can't relax, can't let your guard down. All peace is temporary and short term. There's trouble out there, so you don't sleep well. You don't laugh often. You don't enjoy the sun. You don't whistle as you walk. You're part Chicken Little and part Eeyore. The sky is falling, and it's disproportionately falling on top of you. Anxiety and fear are cousins, but not twins. Fear sees a threat, but anxiety imagines one, which is, I think, one of the best descriptions I've ever heard, because anxiety, I mean, honestly, anxiety is legitimately the idea of anxiety. I think is the idea that anxiety is just a meteor shower of what ifs. That's what it is. I mean, it's a what ifs, and those what ifs almost never happen. You get anxious and scared and fearful over something that what if it might have. It's not like a sniper rifle of this one thing. It's like all of these things, and anxiety is something that wraps people up. The same way with depression. Have
you dealt with either personally?
I have. I think everybody has to a point. Have I? Do I think I've dealt with it on a super deep level? It's a great question. I'm not. I haven't been like clinically diagnosed ever, but I remember walking through starting our church, because my church, I planted it. I started our church about 6 years ago, and walking through the process of starting this church is really hard. I mean, in the same way that, you know, starting a business is hard. It's tough. It's a lot of hard work, a lot of hours, a lot of time, but then add on to it that it's not just about getting a business off the ground, but it's about hopefully changing people's lives. And so you feel like double pressure for it to be successful as a, you know, quote unquote business, as a church, but also for it to be successful spiritually, that people's lives are changed, their hearts are changed and moved. And going through the process of starting the church, you build like a launch team. So you have a bunch of people that are helping you, and and I was surrounded by all these people that were on board. They were excited to come to the church I was starting. They wanted to be a part of it. And I remember feeling utterly alone. I remember being at an event where, I mean, everybody was there. And we had like 40, 50 people there helping us. And this is before the church started, but these are people that were helping us start the church. They were going to be involved working, you know, whether it's, you know, setting up and tearing down each week, whether it's helping with the kids or making coffee on Sunday mornings or whatever. They're going to be doing all this different stuff. And I felt utterly alone. I felt like it was all on me. And at that moment, I really fell into a lot of anxiety, but a lot of depression. You know, and I recognized it because it's, you know, I've talked about in other podcasts, dealing with it whenever I was a kid, dealing with being made fun of and being alone. And it felt the same way. Like I felt like I was by myself, even though I was surrounded by all these people, because.
And you were doing godly work too, right? Like, and I think that's
exactly
a misconception. Maybe, hey, what I'm doing, I mean, there's one thing to be like helping the homeless, but I mean, you're risking your life and your savings to build a church that has to be defined as godly work, and you're surrounded by all these people who want to help you out and see you succeed, and yet you still felt depressed and full of anxiety. Yeah,
I mean, and if you look at, you know, the ideas of depression, there's a lot of words that we sort of use to describe them: unhappiness, sorrow. But I think the biggest thing, and I think it applies to both depression and anxiety to a point, is just feeling hopeless. Like hope is gone. Yet we serve a God that came to bring life and life to the fullest. We serve a God that came to bring a future and a hope. These are verses that he said, like, I came to bring hope for you. Yet we feel hopeless. And a lot of times I think obviously there's a stigma in society, and when it comes to mental health. But I think there's an even bigger one in the church. We feel like you're not allowed to suffer or deal with these things if you have God on your side, that you're not allowed to seek help, because that means you don't have enough faith to get past it if God's on your side. Like there's a big stigma wrapped around on these things in the idea of whether, you know, a Christian can be depressed, can suffer from anxiety. And I think it's something that a lot of people are scared, you know, even within the church, to get help for. You know, in the same way that people in the regular, you know, just in the world are just, a lot of times we suffer. It's a sickness that we suffer alone. More often than probably almost anything, we suffer by ourselves. And that's, you know, that doesn't have to be the case. And, you know, if you look at the idea, there's a book, and if anybody is a counselor or a mental health provider or something like that, they're going to know what this book is. It's called the DSM-5. And the DSM-5 is a book that is the holy grail. It is the Bible for counseling. It is the Bible for mental health. And it basically describes the different disorders and gives you a description and what they are. And while I was, like you said earlier, I'm doing a series at my church all about mental health. We're talking about these issues. And while going through getting ready for this, we really discovered something sort of crazy, which is that not only is it something that Christians can and do suffer from, but it's something that people in the Bible dealt with multiple times. And the biggest one, I think, is King David. If you know anything about the Bible, most of us, everybody's heard of David because you've heard of David and Goliath. Even if you don't know the story, you know, King David was the king of Israel, killed Goliath, he became the king. And the Bible calls him a man after God's own heart, basically saying, like, this was my guy. He's the guy that really united Israel. He screwed up a bunch. He did a lot of stuff wrong, but he was also, goes down in history as the most, beloved king of Israel. Like, he's the guy. So much so that, like, he actually is the, great whatever grandfather of Jesus. He was on Mary's side. He was the great grandfather of Jesus. And God could have picked anybody to be the king, and he could have picked anybody to be the lineage of Jesus, but it was this guy. It was David. So, I mean, this is one of God's guys, like if we look at the Hall of Fame of the Bible, David is on Mount Rushmore. Like, he's one of the guys, like David and Moses and Paul and Abraham. Like, these are the big big dogs, and David suffered from these things. And so if you want, I can walk you through sort of what I mean by that.
Meaning like he was, according to this book, the DS5S or
DSM-5, yeah.
Clinically depressed or clinically anxiety.
Yeah, he had anxiety disorder, and he had clinical depression. Okay, here's some of the things that the DSM-5 lists. I'll go through depression first. Through depression, these are the criteria, and if you have, I believe it's 3 or more of these, you fall into the level of clinical depression, like systematic clinical, like long-lasting depression. And so the first one is depressed mood. Having a depressed mood. And if we look in Psalm 6, and Psalms was a book written by King David. He wrote this, the book of Psalms in the Bible. He says this in Psalm 6:6. He says, "I am weary with moaning. Every night I flood my bed with tears. I drench my couch with weeping. My eye wastes away because of grief. It grows weak because of all my foes." That's depressed, and it's not like he's not saying I do this every now and again. He's saying every night I flood my bed with tears. Every night I suffer from this. So I mean, obviously he is dealing with a depressed mood. Here's a guy who he's wasting away. And that goes right into the next one. The next DSM-5 listing is significant weight loss or decrease in appetite. We go to Psalms 102. He writes, "My heart is struck down like grass and is withered. I forget to eat my bread. Because of loud groanings, my bones cling to my flesh." A guy who forgot, who wouldn't eat, who was losing weight. He was dealing with this. That's number 2. Number 3, insomnia is a symbol of depression. Psalm 6:6 again, that same verse I just read. "I'm weary every night. I flood with tears. I drench my couch with weeping." Every night he was doing this throughout the night. So there's 3. 4. This one is called psychomotor retardation, which basically means you lose the ability to speak. You become somebody who shakes all the time. You have no motor control. You can't speak. You can't hear. You shake. All these things. And so if we go to Psalms 38. Verse 13 says, "But I am like a deaf man. I do not hear, like a mute man who does not open his mouth. I become like a man who does not hear, and in whose mouth there are no rebukes." Like I can't even speak, is what he's saying. Multiple times he talks throughout Psalms about shaking uncontrollably. Like these are things that he dealt with. So there's 4. Number 5, fatigue or loss of energy. Psalms 22, "I am poured out like water. All my bones are out of joint. My heart is like wax. It is melted within my breast. My strength is dried up like a potsherd, and my tongue sticks to my jaws. You lay me in the dust of death." This guy just sounds depressed whenever you read it. Next one was a feeling of worthlessness. Psalms 22. But I am a worm and not a man, scorned by mankind and despised by the people. Now, this is King David. He was a beloved king. People loved him. They loved hanging out with him. They loved being around him. He was a very popular king. Yet, in his mind, I am a worm and not a man, scorned by mankind, despised by the people. This guy just felt worthless. And so there's a bunch more, and I'm not going to go through all of them. You know, he talks about the diminished ability to think or concentrate. And there was a time when he couldn't even go to war when he needed to. He had to send other people to because he couldn't make decisions. Recurring thoughts of death is another sign of depression. In Psalms 55, he said, "My heart is in anguish within me. The terrors of death have fallen upon me." This guy is a guy who clinically was depressed. And then we look at the idea of anxiety. And now anxiety and depression, they're not the same thing. They do go hand in hand a lot, but they're not the same thing. And so if you look at the idea of that, you know, anxiety disorders are the most common mental illness in the United States by a long shot. Right now, they estimate that it affects over 40 million adults. That's 18%. About 1 in 5 people are dealing with not just anxiety, but an anxiety disorder. That's mind-boggling. Women are twice as likely to be diagnosed with anxiety disorder as men. in fact, in the United States, it's the number one mental health problem among women. And for men, it's only second to addiction, to alcohol and drug abuse. That's the only thing it's second to. And basically, individuals that have anxiety disorders, they're at a much, much, much higher risk for other conditions such as depression or substance abuse. And all three of these things really go hand in hand. I mean, we can hear your story and we understand that. Like, we see how you were dealing with these other issues and how they all fed into each other. And I think that's what happens.
I got really high marks on all three. So.
Yeah. I mean, you got good scores on that SAT. Like 80. Here's one a fact that is insane to me. 80% of the people that go to the ER thinking they're having a heart attack are actually suffering from an anxiety attack. 80%. Not 80% of people who have chest pain. 80% of the people who think they have chest pain enough to actually go to the ER. Like, it's an insanely big number. And so, the idea of the deal with anxiety, I mean, if you look at the DSM-5 on that, palpitations or pounding heart, accelerated heartbeat. Well, we read that verse a minute ago from David. My heart is in anguish within me. The terrors of death have fallen upon me. Throughout if you read different versions of the Bible, he says, my heart is sore and pained within me. My heart beats violently within me. My heart is in anguish in me. Like, this is a guy whose heart was hurting. He was under so much anxiety, chest pain, discomfort, trembling or shaking. Fear and trembling has come upon me. Horrors overwhelm me. These are all these verses that we see that David was dealing with. I remember when a few years ago, my mom went to the hospital thinking she was having a heart attack, and it was an anxiety attack. And it took them a while to realize what it was. And she ended up going on medication and getting past it. And so the idea, I think, for a lot of us is that we think that this is something that Christians can't deal with, or that if you love God, like, it's not something you will. We live in a broken world, and people are gonna deal with anxiety. They're going to deal with depression just like we do. Everybody does at some point, gets depressed or gets anxious, but there is a stigma, and I personally think it's especially strong in the Christian world, a stigma against saying, like, I suffer from anxiety disorder. I suffer from depression. We'll say, like, I'm feeling depressed today. But we have a hard time saying I suffer from depression, and a lot of us think that there is nothing we can do about it. That all we have to do is just have faith and pray. And I'm not saying that not have faith. I'm not saying not to pray. Obviously, I'm a pastor. I'm going to tell you to have faith and pray. But I think there are other things we can do to get past it personally.
Yeah, so I actually had breakfast with a gentleman this morning, and he was sharing with me a reason that he had left the church he was going to. Is his son, his teenage son, his only son, and was going through a depression time, and actually, had some notes to commit suicide, to take his life. Mm-hmm. And they were very plugged into the church and went and talked to the church about it. And the church's response was almost looking down upon him. He said, never forget it. when your son is, you don't even know how to interact and what to say to a son when he's talking about taking his life because of depression, from being teased and girlfriend issues of breaking up and a lot of bullying and stuff like that. And their answer essentially was, you're not praying hard enough. Like, making him feel guilty for this. Like, this is your fault as a father and your fault as a mother, that you guys aren't praying hard enough and your faith is not strong enough. That's why your son's dealing with that. And he said it was so hurtful. And he said they kind of just turned their back on him.
Yeah.
What are the thoughts on that? And what is the answer, right? I mean, I know your mom talked a little bit about this too.
Yeah. My mom has been helping me with this series. My mom has a master's degree in professional counseling with a specialization in mental health. And so I've been able to have her actually tag team speak with me. It's been incredible to do that. And so this isn't just me as a pastor, like coming up with stuff. This is stuff that's come from a graduate with a degree in this that works with this. And so, I can give you a couple of different things. And I think both of them are important. And the first is what you do physically, and then what do you do spiritually? Physically, you need to talk to a counselor. You got to get somebody to talk to. And a lot of people say, well, Christians don't need therapists. Yeah, they do. Then I would assume that Christians don't need doctors or lawyers or accountants either. These are professionals that are, I believe, a gift from God. I believe God, we've talked about before, we talked about on the God's purpose for your life. God made everybody on purpose and with a purpose. And some people's purpose is to help you through those hard times. God, I believe, can extend his grace. It's an extension to us through people that we can talk with, that can help with. And they're not perfect. Counselors are not perfect. They're human, but they have just valuable expertise. They can offer to people that are hurting. I think a big thing is understanding that we have to set healthy boundaries in our lives, good boundaries, to keep us on the right road, make sure we make the right choices, in the same way that, like, if you are an alcoholic, it's probably not a good idea to go into a bar. It's just not a smart place to go. And in the same way, if there are people or things in your life that every time you deal with them, you get anxious, every time you deal with them, depression enters your life, you might need to set a boundary there. That might mean cutting somebody out of your life, or at least trimming it way down. It might mean not going certain places or doing certain things. And I think another one is choosing to have joy and have, be thankful. I'm not saying choosing to be happy. Those are two different things. Happiness is an emotion, but we can choose to be joyful even in the bad times. We've seen people do that. People that are going through hard times that just are going to choose to be joyful, to find joy, because the joy of the Lord is our strength, not the joy of what's happening in the world. The joy of God that yeah, I'm going through a hard time and I'm depressed or I'm anxious, but I still serve a God that loves me and cares for me, that he sent his son to die on a cross for me. Like, I'm still able to get through this because of that, and then I think another one that a lot of people are worried about is the idea of taking medication. The idea of taking medication. Well, you don't have enough faith. Here's the deal. In the same way that I talked about therapists, God created people whose giftings was to create medicine. Throughout the Bible, God uses the medicine of the time to create healing in people's lives. Jesus, spit in the mud and made, spit on the dirt and created a mud salve to put on the eyes of blind people so they could be healed. That was a known thing in the doctors of that age. They would put a mud salve on the eyes to heal. Did Jesus need to do that to heal that person? No, but he used what was a common practice to let God work. If you look back, we talk about King David. King David was like the most beloved king. The second most beloved king of Israel was probably a guy named King Hezekiah. And King Hezekiah, when he was 39 years old, basically the prophet of the day, Isaiah, came in to talk to Hezekiah and said, hey, God has told me that you need to get your house in order because you're about to die. You're going to die. And Hezekiah was a good man. He had served God well. He had listened to God. And he'd served his people well. And so as Isaiah was leaving Hezekiah's house, Hezekiah prayed a simple prayer to God that basically reminded God of how he had been faithful to him. Just a beautiful little prayer. And God stopped Isaiah before he walked out of the house and said, hey, go back to him. And so Isaiah goes back to Hezekiah and says, God is going to give you another 15 years. You're going to have another 15 years. See, Hezekiah, he had all these like boils, like skin rashes that were exploding all over his body. And Hezekiah said, God's going to give you another 15 years, but first your servants need to make what's called a cake of figs, which was basically a salve, like an ointment made out of figs. and they need to put it on. And that was, the cake of figs was a known ointment of the day. And they placed it on all these boils, and he was immediately healed. See, God likes to use, I believe, he uses us to make a difference in the world. And by using us, sometimes he's going to use medication. He's going to use those things. So there's nothing wrong with using them when you're dealing with depression or anxiety. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. And so physically, the stuff that the world says to do is the stuff you should be doing for the most part. Like, get the medication you need, find somebody to talk with, choose to be joyful. Your mind has the power to make you sick. We all understand that you can make yourself sick and depressed through your mind. So why can't the mind that God gave you have the power to help you get better as well? Choose to be joyful. And then finally, I think what we need to talk about is like spiritually. So that's the physical side of things. And so we all know those things. We've all heard them. And hopefully I've alleviated the concern spiritually that those things are okay. They're all good. If I was suffering from depression right now, I'd be seeing a counselor. I have medication if I needed to. But what do you do when you're dealing with depression or anxiety spiritually? The fight against those things is not a fight that just comes and goes. When you're really dealing with clinical depression, when you're dealing with clinical, I mean, you understand that it's a daily, every day. Yeah. It's a constant battle. 1 Timothy 6:12 says it like this: "Fight the good fight of faith. Take hold of eternal life to which you were called." Like, the fight is constant. It's not a well, if once I get it beat, then I'm good. It's the same thing. When somebody who is an addict, it's not something they just get over. You're an addict. They fight it. It's constantly something you have to be working against. And so when you're, and I know that there's somebody listening or watching this right now that's dealing with this right now, because you might be somebody who is just, you've been fighting depression or anxiety your whole life. Maybe it was spurred on by something. You got divorced, you lost a job, death of a loved one, something, or maybe it's just something you've dealt with your whole life. When you're constantly fighting, you're going to get weak. You're going to get tired. It's that even though the fight might start going your way at first, at some point it's going to kick your butt a little bit. I think of, I was out fishing a few weeks ago, and I was on a big boat, and we were offshore, like 45 miles. And I hooked into something. Now, I can't tell you what it is. I mean, I'll tell you it was probably a world record, of course, of whatever it was. It was, and I was on my big rod, my personal biggest rod. So it has 80-pound test braid on it. It had 120-pound leader on the end of it, or top shot. And I fought this thing all the way around this boat like 3 times. And I fought it for 45 minutes. Like, and I was so excited when I hooked into this thing, because I felt like I was making ground. I was bringing it up, but then it ran, and I brought it up, and then it ran, and I brought it up. And I remember like 45 minutes in, this is like, for me, would have been like a fish of a lifetime had it not broken off. It would have been a fish of a lifetime. Whatever it was gigantic. And if you would have asked me 5 minutes into that fight whether whether I wanted to be the one to bring this thing all the way in, there would have been no question in my mind. But 45 minutes in, I was like, somebody has to take this thing from me. Like, I can't do this. Like, I was so tired. I was so beat because it hadn't stopped. And so spiritually, when you're dealing with depression and anxiety and you're having a hard time, here's my spiritual answer. What you need is that you need to be a part of a church community. You need to be a part of people that are there to lift your arms up when things are going bad, that are there to support you, that understand that at some point I'm going to hand you the fishing rod and you're going to fight it for a few minutes, but I'm still going to take it back and I'm still going to kick this fish's butt. It's still going to be my catch. It's still going to be my thing, but I'm going to need help. And so like, hear me on this. Like this is what I mean. Like faith in God, it's not motivated by your behavior. It's not motivated by the things that you do. It is inspired by belonging to a group of people that are there with you in the fight. The problem comes so often for people is that they fight for weeks or days or months, years, and sometimes it doesn't go away. They're still dealing with it, and you end up sitting there going, where is God? Why are you silent? Why can't I get past that? Why aren't you helping me? And just in that moment, just those thoughts can actually trigger more depression. They can trigger more anxiety, and eventually just exhaustion is going to set in your life. And then you want to give up. You want to give up on God. You want to give up on everything. I think a lot of times just that mental health thing, that's what leads to a lot of suicides and a lot of issues of people just going, I'm just done. I'm tired of fighting this. But when we fight together, it becomes a whole different story. When you have somebody there with you, when you hold each other's hands up, and it's amazing how much longer you can fight when somebody is fighting with you. It's amazing how much longer I could keep fighting that fish when somebody else was there to take the rod in the moment whenever I was too weak. And in the same way, if when that moment when you're just so depressed, when life has just got you down, and you're able to have somebody at your church or somebody that you can call and say, look, I'm struggling, man. I do it all the time. Can I tell you, like, as a pastor, you know this, Joe, like we're in the process of planting our church or not planting, but moving our church we've been a portable church for 6 years, and we're moving into a permanent building. And the anxiety level that I'm experiencing right now is off the charts. We have like 7 weeks to get done. Financially, we're coming up short time and time again. And it just amazingly, I'm always just anxious. I'm always struggling with it. And I have people, Joe, you're one of them, that I can call and be like, man, pray for me. I'm going through this hard time. I have pastors and friends that I can call, like, help me. I need help. See, I think the biggest misconception is that, and the problem is that misconception isn't really a misconception for a lot of churches. A lot of churches that we've been to have done what they did to your friend. They've said, it's your fault. But what the church God intended, and what a lot of churches are, and I encourage you, if you're struggling with this, find one. You can come to my church or call me. I'll help you find one wherever you live. I have a connection, a group of people that we work together around the country, and I can help you find a church. But I can tell you at my church and at these churches that my church is not a museum for perfect people. It is a hospital for the broken. It is a place for people that are just waiting to help. People that used to be broken get better, and they stay because they know somebody else that's broken is going to come, and we're going to need help. We're going to need nurses. We're going to need doctors on hand to help people. Fighting a depression alone, fighting anxiety alone, instead of fighting it alone and putting all that effort into fighting it, put a little effort into finding people that can support you and walk with you through it. So do the physical stuff, the stuff you need to do, get the doctors, get the counselors, get the medication, choose to be joyful, but spiritually find people that are there ready to help. Find a church that's there, that people that want to help, that they know, like, fighting, the fight isn't about you doing the right things. It's about focusing on the right places, focusing on the good, focusing on the joy, and focusing on finding people that are there to help you, that can help you focus instead of on the bad things that are happening, to focus on this awesome grace that God already gave you. And that sucks. That situation is bad, but God still loves you, and I'm here to help you through it. And so spiritually speaking, I think that's the biggest thing we can do, is find a place to help us.
I love it. And after going through it and having a legit anxiety disorder for over a decade, that was the part that I missed. And meaning the spiritual side. I did the pills. I popped a bunch of different pills, even talked to counselors, and I felt like there was always something missing. And I did share with my parents who, gave me Bible verses, and a couple of their friends, hey, just say this Bible verse in the shower every day. And I tried that. And what was funny is I had no faith. I was hoping that me saying this Bible verse over and over again, he who dwells in the shelter of the Most High, who abides in the shadow of the Mighty, will say I have the whole thing still memorized. It's like Psalm 91 or something. I have the whole thing memorized. I said it over and over again, and I never believed it would help me because I couldn't feel the instant result like a pill would give me. But when I finally just opened my heart a little bit and opened my mind a little bit to God and to Jesus and to prayer, that was when it all started changing. And I'd be lying if I said it happened overnight. It didn't. Just like if you're dealing with alcohol abuse or depression, there's not going to be a magic pill that one morning it's just gone. It is mostly gone for me. And the biggest things ever were even sharing publicly on the podcast. Like every time I've been bold enough to share a little bit more, the burden is gone and the fear is gone. I feel like now I'm not alone, and so many more people reach out and say, man, I dealt with the same thing. And you think you're not alone. I feel like I was on a barrier island all by myself, just fighting this thing. And I'm mad at God. I'm mad at the world. Why is no one else dealing with this? And you'll be blown away with how many people around you are in a church community or biblical community have gone through the same thing or currently are fighting the same battle. And that made it so much easier. And then the prayer and the breathing, I talk about that. Even the Bible verse, I'm getting excited to talk about. I would say it as fast as I could in the shower when what I needed to be doing was slowing down.
Thinking about it. Yeah,
absolutely. And breathing, the meditation, the prayer, that all really tied in together. That was what changed it for me.
I mean, God wants to carry this stuff for you. He doesn't want you walking around with it. The Bible says that his burden is easy, his yoke is light. Like, he wants to help. In fact, if we go back to just to finish up, David, a guy that we've been able to show was clinically depressed, suffered from anxiety disorder. This guy was messed up. He struggled and struggled and struggled. Yet in the same book of the Bible, in Psalms, he writes, in Psalm 55, he writes, cast your cares on the Lord because he will take care of you. Like, here's a guy who is in the midst of depression, in the midst of anxiety, still saying, you know what, I'm suffering. I'm dealing with all these things, but I'm going to cast my cares on God. I'm going to let him take care of you and take care of me. I think for us if people aren't dealing with it, the best way, the only way to help for us, the only way to get rid of the stigma of depression, of anxiety, of mental health disorders, the only way to get rid of that is through compassion. We need to learn as a society to not look down our noses at somebody who is, we look at somebody who has cancer with compassion, but yet we look at somebody who suffers from depression or anxiety disorder as, well, what's wrong with them? We need to learn that ending that stigma so that people are willing to ask help starts with us having compassion, the ability to understand and share feelings. Because here's the deal. Everybody suffers from anxiety and depression at some point. You might not have clinical depression, but you've been depressed. Everybody has. We've gone through bad breakups or loss of job or just bad situations. We just get depressed. Sometimes you just feel depressed. And we're coming up on Christmas, the time that people deal with depression and anxiety the most. And the ability to understand that other people are going through it maybe a little deeper than you, the ability to have compassion is the only way to end that stigma. It's the only way only then will the judgment that we intentionally or unintentionally impose on other people comes to an end. I mean, people who suffer from mental health just don't speak about their problems so often. They have a fear of stigma, a fear of being isolated. And at the same time, a lot of us, have a fear, we're afraid to reach out because we're afraid we might be drawn into drama. We might be, or just we don't know what to say, but be willing to ask for help. Don't get upset and more depressed because somebody doesn't notice if you're not willing to ask, because you don't know what that somebody that didn't notice is going through as well. But on the other side, if you see somebody sitting there with their head in their hands, they're in anguish, they're obviously hurt, go sit down next to them. Ask, are you okay? And when they say they're fine, don't let them lie. Say, no, really, what's going on? And listen to their story. If somebody is, tells you that their husband or their wife is leaving and don't just say, all right, I'll be praying for you, and then shuffle away as quick as you can. Pray with them. Love them. Say, I'm here for you. I mean, compassion. Here's the deal. We need to be willing to ask for help when we need it, but we also need to be willing to give compassion to those who do need it, even if they haven't asked. Compassion is not easy. It requires us to be vulnerable. It requires us to take risks, and neither of those are particularly comfortable. But if we want to make our world a better place, it doesn't happen through government. It's not going to happen through, community action groups. It's going to happen when we as people, and I believe the church, become the light the world wants and the world needs. I mean, when we are compassionate and loving and caring for those that are needy, when we understand that church and God is all about the broken, and that's what it's there for, and that we have the ability to help, and then also the ability to ask for help when we need it. So,
love it, dude. Whew. So, guys, if you're personally feeling hopeless, I truly believe, because I went through it, reaching out to someone, joining a church, just sharing your pain and your suffering and what you're going through was more powerful than any pill I could have ever taken. I didn't want to believe that, but it was true. And the more I've done it, the more it's worked. And all we ask is, if you got anything out of this, or maybe you have a loved one, a son, daughter, wife, uncle, someone else at your church or any community that you think might benefit from this, share it. That's all we ask. Share it.
Yeah.
Give us a review, subscribe. It helps this thing go forward. And if you're in Central Florida, go visit Pastor Johnny.
Yeah, come to this
church coming soon.
Yeah, a new building coming in the first week of January. We'll be there, but we're only about a quarter of a mile from that location now. So discoverfamilychurch.com. We're in Lakeland, Florida. We'd love to have you. But if you're not here and you need help finding one of these kind of churches, these life-giving churches I'm talking about, you can email me, or if you just want somebody to pray with you, you just want to talk to me, you can email me at Johnny, JOHNNY, Johnny at discoverfamilychurch.com.
Love it. And I'm Joe, JOE, at saltstrong.com. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to hear that this episode made an impact, and any other questions that you have. I want to do one probably next on breathing and meditation and slowing down. I think it's the opposite of kind of what's happening in society, that everything's fast and we want things instantaneously, and we're all going 100 miles an hour and multitasking. And it's pretty interesting. If you look at the Bible, this guy named Jesus, I don't think a single time they talked about him sprinting anywhere or being in a hurry, and he did quite a lot in a short amount of time. And so I want to talk about that next. As we were talking through it, I was like, man, that'll be a good one. So
yeah, that'd be really good.
That'll be a future one. Sure. Guys, thank you so much. Pastor Johnny, thank you. This has been a really powerful one. And please do share this. That's all we ask. And reach out to us if you guys need any help, prayers, love, etc. We out.
Peace.
See you, buddy.
Bye.
'Cause fishing, it's in my soul, it was pain.